Okay, let's go over a couple final stats here because we have a huge show for you today. But I got to do a little NBA Finals because sometimes this podcast, mine, has suffered a bit because I don't want to do the exact same stuff that I've just done with Bill hours prior. But now we're at 3-2. Milwaukee, for any cliche, has all the momentum. They don't just have all the momentum. They're better at basketball right now. They figured a couple things out. And honestly, the turns that all three stars took in Game 5 was I don't know who's beating them in that. Maybe look, I don't want to turn it into like, hey, I still think the Nets would have beaten everybody if they were healthy. But what we saw from Milwaukee, what we've seen these last few games, specifically Game 5, they have all three stars look like Hall of Famers rotating at different times offensively of just being completely unstoppable. I mean, that's ridiculous. I'm going to share a couple numbers with you here. The first one, though, I'll just jump into that one because that's the most relevant. Here it is. The Bucks' big three in the last three games, all wins. Giannis is averaging 33, 12, and 7 on 60% shooting. Middleton's going for 29, 7, and 5 on 47 and 39% shooting. And 86% from the free throw line. Drew, who at one point was being called Drew Bledsoe on this podcast because we saw all those screen grabs of, hey, here's what Drew Holiday's done in the playoffs. Here's what Eric Bledsoe did in the playoffs for the Bucks. There's not really much difference other than you'd still, even at Drew's worst offensive output, have to give him the benefit of the doubt defensively because that's been a big part of this series too, but not the only reason Chris Paul has struggled. But Drew's now 25 boards, 10 rebounds, 2 steals a game, and now his splits are 44, 39, and 100% from the free throw line. That's the last 3 games. Those are all wins by the Bucks, and that's why you pay those guys that kind of money. That's why you go ahead and make those trades, even if many times you're like, man, that's a lot for Drew Holiday, who's been hurt at times and missed the time. He's a little bit older, and then you only had him for the 1 year, whatever, man. I mean, when the stuff works out and you're a game away from winning a title, you can start talking yourself into it, which doesn't mean if they were to lose the next 2 games and Phoenix pulls this miraculous comeback, which does not seem possible at this point, that all of a sudden the Drew thing isn't worth it. I don't think it should be that fragile. I think what you're doing here is you're going, what kind of pieces can I add to this team that at their ceiling, there's something special there. And right now, all 3 of those guys showed you something like off the chart special in Game 5. Let's go back to Devin Booker's run here, because as Paul has struggled, which we're going to get to again, Booker has had some incredible offensive moments, but that last possession, he had no plan when Drew stripped him and led to the breakout at the other end. So that was a bad possession for 2 reasons. They didn't get a shot off, and then it led to an easy breakout for Milwaukee on the other side of it, as Phoenix was furiously trying to come back in that game. I mean, there's some criticism, hey, they didn't play Chris Paul enough, they didn't play Booker enough in Game 5, and he sat him too much, and that's a problem. That's part of it, but there's just, hey, Milwaukee's going to shoot like that. I don't know if there's a ton you can do, because here's another stat that we'll throw at you. The Suns in Game 5 shot 55 from the floor and 60 from 3. So 55 overall and 60 from 3. The first time in history an NBA team has lost a playoff game shooting at those numbers, which again gets us back to the Bucks' big 3 and how that's even possible. But Booker, you could tell, I love they didn't call a timeout at the end of Game 5. They still had a shot clock in play, so it wasn't like a straight run it down to 0 and take a shot. We already know this. But Booker was in between decisions. So Booker wasn't thinking about clock and then thought about clock. And then by the time he kept thinking about all this stuff, Drew's coming off to help Chris Paul, because Booker has 24 field goal attempts in the 4th quarter of this series. He has 0 assists. Now, there was 1 assist that was maybe going to happen, that 1-8 that Giannis broke up, which will be his kind of legacy play for Giannis, as much as Chris Paul trying to cross up Giannis at the end of Game 4 and falling down and having it be a layup. If this doesn't work out for Phoenix, that's going to be unfortunate. That's going to be like a Mike Tyson face tattoo for Chris Paul's playoff run. All right. So we have that part. Now, speaking of Chris Paul, let's bring up this stat that you've seen running around. I get, if you don't like Chris Paul, you're going to pile on. I like him. I think something's wrong, whether it's mental or physical, I don't know. But even with the Game 5 numbers that a couple years from now, if you looked at him and said, hey, what are you talking about? Like, he was pretty good. He made all his threes. It's 20 and 10. Like, he was pretty good in Game 5. I think he's still somewhat disengaged. Now, I also saw some people saying, like, Monty was sitting him because he wasn't playing well. It wasn't that significant. Monty has done a deal where he's tried to pace Paul and bring him back strong for the 4th quarter. That's exactly why Paul at the end of Game 4, or excuse me, at the half of Game 4, had played almost everybody that was a major rotation guy. And, look, I think they're just trying to find a way to preserve him, but I'm not going to buy the, hey, he's old and now he's tired excuse when he lit up the Clippers a few weeks ago and lit up the Bucks in game 1. Now he's all of a sudden tired with 3 days off in between. So I'm not accepting that as an excuse. But however, even though I'm a Paul fan and I'm disappointed, and I'm telling you, I don't think he was as good as the stat line will be in game 5. So now I don't know what the hell to do with him. The piling on historical playoff trend stuff with him, some of it's fair. This stat that's out there now is not. And everybody's all over it, including ESPN, which I was kind of surprised they went through because it takes you 5 minutes of research to realize how flawed this is. It's that Chris Paul, if they blow this 2-0 lead, he'll be the first player in NBA history to blow 2-0 lead in the playoffs 4 times. Now, first time it happened was in 2008 with the Hornets against the Spurs. That Hornets team was not very good. They lost in 7 to San Antonio. And we're talking about 2 of the top 4 seeds. Go back and look at that 2008 Hornets team. Again, some nice role players, not a great team. Chris Paul, those guys are up 2-0. They lost to a prime Duncan. 2013, they were up 2-0 against the Memphis Grizzlies. Blake got hurt. Blake played 19 minutes with 4 points in game 5, 14 minutes and 9 points in game 6. If you remember that, I think he was hurt in game 4. He was a completely different guy, shell of himself. So that was because Blake got hurt. 2016 2-0 lead against the Portland Trail Blazers. Somebody got hurt. You know who that guy was? They blew the 2-0 lead. It was Chris Paul. And now this one, which is far more egregious and horrible compared to any of those other ones because this is going to be on him. But that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, look, you want to knock him? Go ahead. I can't defend the last 2 games. I can't defend the effort, the deferring to campaign and major possessions at the end of the game 4. I can't defend any of that stuff. And I'm to the point now where I'm like, maybe I was just wrong about this guy. I don't feel like I was, but maybe I was. And we'll have to see where I'm at and have to accept that at the end of it. But let's end with a positive because Giannis at 26 years old is almost the perfect guy to win a championship here because all the stuff that even though we love the stars, but the pettiness and some of the bullshit and the stuff about like, is it really about basketball or is it about everything else? It's the moving around, which again, I don't really get on the player's case for deciding to team up because I just think that's what this generation is. So you can get mad about it, but I don't want to waste that kind of energy. But I can be whatever to that part of it, but still respect and admire the fact that Giannis, isn't there yet. Maybe he would be, maybe if they got bounced out earlier again this year, granted he just did the extension, but maybe he would have bounced in 2 years. Who knows? I don't think I would ever rule anybody out after learning about Kawhi doing it with San Antonio. But he has put together some assist games. And now his assist ratio is not necessarily that much higher on some of the advanced stuff in the playoffs. You go back to even 2 years ago, he's about the same. But the usage rate has dipped down to the lowest usage rate that he's had in a playoff season in the last 3 years. And this is somebody at one point where you're like, okay, but he is the unlimited offensive player. Yeah, I think that's still somewhat true. Is he going to make his free throws? Like all these concerns that we had about him that we started seeing sort of amplified during the Nets series that they still got through that. He's found ways to complement Middleton especially, but Drew and Middleton when those guys have it rolling. And yet his effort and his attitude is like unflappable throughout. So here's a 26-year-old Giannis in his first NBA Finals that looks completely comfortable. And I think as far as stars go, his popularity, like his approval rating, that Q rating that we hear about people on morning television, his is already through the roof, especially with that quote about the ego and your past and all that kind of stuff, even though I'm not sure I 100% agree with it, but everybody seemed to love it. This is somebody that could be the face of the NBA in a way that we may not have had before because he came in as a middle round pick. He's foreign. People aren't quite sure. I was looking back at it. His rookie year, he shot 35% from 3. Easily the best of any season. Now, some people think he got so jacked and his shoulders are so big, it screwed up his shooting mechanism altogether. So maybe that's the case. But I would say that it's hard to find somebody who didn't like Giannis already. It's almost impossible now, as he's a game away from an NBA championship, to find somebody in the basketball world that talks about basketball, who's just a fan of basketball, that doesn't appreciate him even more if he pulls this off.